The day the divorce was finalized felt strangely quiet. After months of arguments, lawyers, and endless paperwork, it was finally over. My wife stood confidently in the courtroom, her expression calm but triumphant. She had asked for almost everything during the settlement: the house, the furniture, the cars, and most of our shared savings. Her lawyer had presented the case so smoothly that the judge barely hesitated before agreeing. I sat silently while the decision was read. The large, suburban house we had lived in for years would belong to her now. The expensive living room set she loved, the big television, even the dining table we had bought during our first year of marriage, all of it would stay with her. Then there was the last item on the property list: the storage shed located behind the house will remain under the ownership of Mr. Carter, the judge said, glancing briefly at the documents. My wife chuckled softly. That old junk shed, she whispered to her lawyer loud enough for me to hear. They both smiled like it was some kind of joke. The shed sat at the very back of the property, hidden behind tall trees and a crooked wooden fence. It was small, old, and looked like it could collapse in a strong wind. Over the years, it had become a dumping place for broken tools, rusted lawn equipment, and dusty boxes that no one had opened in decades. To everyone in that courtroom, it looked like I had lost everything. While she walked away with the real prize, but I didn't argue. I simply nodded and accepted the keys when the paperwork was finished. As we walked out of the courthouse, my ex-wife stopped near the parking lot and looked at me with a smug smile. "Well," she said, adjusting her sunglasses, "I hope you enjoy your shed." Her friends laughed. I didn't respond. I just placed the keys in my pocket and walked to my car. The truth was, the shed had never meant much to her. She saw it as nothing more than an ugly wooden box, ruining the perfect view of the backyard. Several times during our marriage, she had asked me to tear it down, but I had always refused. The shed had belonged to my grandfather. When he passed away years ago, he left it to me along with the small piece of land it stood on. I still remember the day he handed me the old iron key, his voice serious in a way I had never heard before. "Whatever happens in life," he had said, "never sell that shed at the time." I thought it was just sentimental advice from an old man who loved his property. My grandfather had been stubborn about many things, but there had been something unusual in his tone that day, something almost secretive now years later. As I sat in my car outside the courthouse, I pulled the rusty key from my pocket and stared at it. Maybe the shed really was worthless. Maybe it truly was just a pile of junk. But deep down, I had always felt there was something more about it, something my grandfather never fully explained. And soon I was finally going to find out. A week after the divorce, I finally returned to the property to see the shed again. The place felt strange now, like I was visiting someone else's life. The house that used to be mine looked the same from the outside, but I knew everything inside belonged to my ex-wife now. Her car was parked in the driveway. As I walked through the side path toward the backyard, I noticed the curtains in the upstairs window move slightly. She was watching me. I could almost imagine the small smile on her face, the same one she had in court. To her, this was probably entertaining. After all, what kind of man loses his house and comes back just to check on an old, falling-apart shed? The wooden structure stood exactly where it always had, behind a line of tall trees near the fence. The paint was peeling even worse than I remembered, and one corner of the roof sagged slightly. It looked like it had survived 100 storms. I unlocked the door with the rusty key. The hinges creaked loudly as the door slowly opened. Inside, the air smelled like dust and old wood. Sunlight slipped through cracks in the walls, lighting up floating particles in the air. The shed was filled with years of forgotten things: old gardening tools, broken chairs, rusty lawnmower parts, and boxes stacked unevenly against the walls. Most people would have seen nothing but junk, but this place held memories. My grandfather and I used to spend afternoons here when I was a kid. He would fix tools while telling long stories about the past. Back then, the shed looked much stronger and cleaner than it did now. I stepped inside and began moving things around. Mostly out of curiosity, I wasn't even sure what I was looking for. Hours passed while I sorted through piles of old items under a dusty workbench. I noticed a heavy metal toolbox that I didn't remember seeing before. It was old and scratched, the kind mechanics used decades ago. I pulled it out and wiped the dust off the lid. The lock had rusted away, so it opened easily. Inside were several things: some old papers, a folded map, and a small sealed envelope that looked surprisingly clean. Compared to everything else, my name was written on it. My heart started beating faster. I carefully opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. The handwriting was instantly recognizable. It belonged to my grandfather. The letter was short, but every word felt important. He explained that many years ago, he had quietly purchased something connected to this small piece of land. He had never told anyone about it, not even the rest of the family. According to him, the shed wasn't the important part. What mattered was what lay beneath it. Next to the letter was the folded map. When I opened it, I saw detailed markings on the land around the property. A red circle was drawn exactly where the shed stood. I stared at the map, confused. Just then, I heard a voice from the backyard. "Well, look at that," my ex-wife called out from the patio, clearly watching me through the open shed door. "Find anything valuable in your little junk pile yet?" I folded the map quickly and slipped it back into the toolbox. For the moment, I simply smiled and shook my head. But inside, something told me. My grandfather had left behind a secret that could change everything. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the letter and the strange map my grandfather had left behind. The red circle around the shed kept replaying in my mind. His words echoed in my head. The shed is not the important part. What matters is what lies beneath it. The next morning, I decided I needed answers. I gathered the documents, the map, and the letter, and drove into the city. After asking around, I found a property lawyer who specialized in land ownership and mineral rights. His office was small, but filled with shelves of legal books and framed certificates. When I handed him the documents, he adjusted his glasses and began. Reading carefully at first, his expression was neutral. But after a few minutes, his eyebrows slowly lifted in surprise. "Where did you get these?" he asked. "They belong to my grandfather." I replied he owned the land where an old shed sits. According to the divorce agreement, that small piece of land now belongs to me. The lawyer leaned back in his chair and looked at me in disbelief. "You may want to sit down," he said. My stomach tightened as I lowered myself into the chair across from his desk. He spread the map and documents across the table and pointed at several markings. According to the paperwork, my grandfather had quietly purchased the mineral rights to the land. Decades ago back then, it probably didn't seem like anything important. But recently something had changed. Just a few miles from that property, a mining company had started surveying the area during their research. They discovered signs of a rare and extremely valuable mineral deposit. Underground, the lawyer tapped the map again. The survey area overlaps with this land. He explained specifically the section directly under your shed. For a moment, I couldn't say anything. "You mean," I began slowly, "yes." The lawyer said if the surveys are correct, that small patch of land may sit on top of a very valuable deposit. My mind raced. All those years, my grandfather had protected that shed for a reason. He must have suspected something long before anyone else did. "Do other people know about this?" I asked. "Not yet," the lawyer replied. "But companies will soon. When they realize you own the mineral rights to that exact location, they'll want to talk to you." He wasn't wrong. Only 3 days later, I received a phone call from a representative of a large mining corporation. They were polite but direct. They wanted to meet, apparently. Their geological survey had confirmed the deposit's location. And unfortunately for them, or fortunately for me, the richest point was exactly where my worthless shed stood. News travels quickly in small neighborhoods. A day later, when I returned to the shed to think things over, I noticed my ex-wife standing by the fence. She looked unusually curious. So she said casually, pretending it was just small talk, "I heard some people from a company were asking about that shed." I shrugged, "Just business stuff." She narrowed her eyes slightly. The same shed she once called junk suddenly seemed very interesting to her. But one thing was already clear. According to the divorce papers, the land and the shed belonged to me and only me within the next 2 weeks. Everything changed faster than I could have imagined. The mining company representatives visited the shed several times. With their engineers and survey equipment, they studied the land carefully, taking measurements and checking their geological reports. Each time they left, they looked more excited than before. Finally, they asked me to come to their office for a meeting. I sat across from 3 executives in a large conference room while they explained the situation in detail. According to their final survey results, the mineral deposit beneath the shed was not only real, it was extremely valuable. The richest concentration happened to sit directly under that small, aging wooden structure everyone had laughed about. One of the executives slid a folder across the table. Inside was their official offer. They wanted to purchase the mineral rights in the land, where the shed stood in exchange. They were offering $3.8 million. For a moment, I simply stared at the number just weeks earlier. I had walked out of court feeling like I had lost everything. My ex-wife had taken the house, the cars, the furniture, almost every part of the life we had built together, and all I had left was a dusty shed full of broken tools. Now that same shed had turned into something worth millions. I took a deep breath and signed the agreement. The deal was finalized within days. The company transferred the money, and soon heavy machinery began arriving near the back of the property to start preparations for excavation. Of course, the news spread quickly through the neighborhood, and eventually it reached my ex-wife. One evening, she appeared at the fence. While workers were unloading equipment near the shed, her confident attitude from the divorce was gone. Instead, she looked nervous. "Almost desperate you didn't tell me the shed was valuable," she said sharply. I looked at her calmly. "I didn't know it was," I replied. She crossed her arms, clearly frustrated that land should be part of the house property. "It's in the same backyard." I simply reminded her of the divorce agreement. The document clearly stated that the house and yard belonged to her, but the shed and the land it stood on belonged to me. Still, she wasn't willing to accept it. A week later, she tried to challenge the agreement in court, claiming the property division had been unfair. But the judge barely needed a few minutes to review the documents. The settlement was signed by both parties. He said firmly, "The ownership of the shed is clearly defined." Her case was dismissed immediately. For the first time since the divorce began, she looked completely stunned. She had fought hard to keep the mansion, the luxury furniture, and every expensive thing we owned. The only thing she had happily given away was the worthless junk shed. Months later, I moved into a quiet new home in another town, far away from the drama sometimes. I still think about my grandfather and the strange warning he gave me all those years ago. Never sell the shed back then. I didn't understand why. Now I do. Because the one thing everyone thought was worthless turned out to be the most valuable thing of all.